All right, Melanie, I can see some people coming in from the waiting room.
Okay, and you kick it off, Nicola?
I will.
Okay.
I'm going to just wait for a few more people to come in, and then we will kick it off. It's still a minute before 9.
Okay.
It's still coming in, Molly. All right, so it's 9 o'clock. My coffee is gone. So that's probably an indication to welcome everybody. I'm Nicola Barrett, Chief Corporate Learning Officer at Emory Executive Education at Goizueta Business School. And thank you so much for joining us for today's Business Over Breakfast conversation. I found it really strange not to connect with everyone last Thursday, given our new regimen of having Business Over Breakfast on the first and the third Thursdays of each month. But there is nothing more constant than change. And the last year has been one of extreme change, extreme adaptation, and an extreme test of everyone's abilities to communicate effectively, given so many of us are physically isolated from our work colleagues. Before we welcome our faculty guide for today's session, I want to share that we haven't just been talking to you, we've been listening to you. Based on your reaction to Jamie Turner's session, we've been working on a special 4-part series designed as a deeper dive on the unspoken rules of leadership, how to get the best from yourself and others. Each session is devoted to one of the 4 leadership pillars Jamie shared with us. And I'm going to go a little off script here and say, for the first person who can correctly put in the chat what the 4 pillars are, can have a free seat in this new offering, which is going to start, and I should know this, I think in about 4 to 6 weeks, we'll put it up there. So the first person who can name those 4 pillars of leadership can have a free seat in this deeper dive. Today, we are welcoming back Goizueta Business School Professor Molly Epstein. Molly's teaching is focused on effective communication and negotiations, and she combines a background in both language and business to help students and executives maximize their professional performance. In her areas of specialty and research are included change communication, intergenerational communication, and communicating with gender intelligence. This morning, Molly is going to explore strategies to craft and deliver a successful message for change so that our teams and stakeholders can more quickly get on board and support new initiatives. Molly's going to kick off the webinar with some thoughts about effectively communicating change, followed by Q&A. So please write your questions in the Q&A section at the bottom of the screen, and we will do our best to get to as many of those questions as possible. If you want to keep honing your communication skills, please consider an upcoming course starring Molly on executive communication and leadership presence. And that starts April 12th. It is run in a dynamic online live mode, taking advantage of technology and allowing people to join us from many different locales. And I know that people watching and coming to these Business Over Breakfast do come from not only a number of different counties around Atlanta and Georgia, but different states and different countries. So all are welcome. So enjoy the morning, and I look forward to continuing the conversation on April 1st, and that's not a joke. Molly, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. So let's talk about communicating change. I'd like to start off with hearing from you. So can you all hear me? Can you give me a thumbs up if you can hear me okay?
Yes, Molly, we can hear you.
Great, thank you. Okay, so I know that you all have experienced lots of change in the last year, as Nicola said. So share some of your thoughts here. We know that growth means change. And I have 2 questions for you. They'll happen sequentially. The first one is, what characterizes effective change communication? So go ahead and put in, let me go into my Menti here. Go to menti.com and enter this code 5782-9947 and go ahead and put in your thoughts about what characterizes effective change communication. They're coming in. Oh, love this. Okay. Beautiful. Okay, so now can you all see the Menti responses? I believe I am still screen sharing that. If someone could give me a little thumbs up or a yes.
Yes.
Great, thank you. Okay, look at this amazing theme that is emerging here. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Transparency has come up over and over and over again. So this obviously would make a great word cloud because transparency would be the biggest, the biggest one in the middle. But empathetic, timely, constant and consistent messaging to stakeholders. Yes, absolutely. The more that we can communicate what's happening, the more we can engage our stakeholders. Now, it doesn't mean that we always have good news, and sometimes we don't even have news, but the key is to keep those lines of communication opening and to keep the conversation flowing, because the more we can create transparency, the more we can build trust and support for the change that we're experiencing. So thank you so much for that. Let's go to the next one. So the next one is, what have you seen work well in communicating change? Transparency has got a big presence already. Good asking for feedback. I love that. Good feedback. Oh, consistency. Excellent. Excellent. Very nice. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. I love that consistency continues to be the main word. We might notice that in a moment it gets overshadowed by something, but consistency so far has been a big theme. Consistency, feedback, transparency. Great. Thank you so much. Feedback appears in a couple different ways here. We've got asking for feedback. We've got some information about face-to-face. I like that. Online chats. So lots of mention of the communication channels that we can use. Kindness. Oh, I love that. Yes. Change is hard. It's very hard. And when organizational change is overlaid with societal change, like a pandemic, it can be a really, really stressful time. And the more that we can keep that information flowing, the more we can be honest and answer questions. I see someone has put in the word cloud here, frequently asked questions. Yes, collect those questions, answer them, circulate the responses. Keep that sense of communication open. All right, consistency, transparency, feedback, honesty. I love that. Thank you, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to minimize this. And now we should be back on my slides. Are we? We're back on the regular slides?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, great. Okay, so thank you for that. We'll weave your responses back through today because you really hit the nail on the head. And what that tells me is that you probably experienced some change yourself. And we all have examples of things that we saw organizations do well and things that we've earmarked to do better next time. So we're going to look at two ways that you can better craft your communication message. The first is thinking about how you're going to structure that message. And then once we do that, we'll move into communicating your message. So for each one of you, we can make this your own personal mini case study. So I'm going to begin by encouraging you to think of a time when you have had to have a change communication initiative or something that you're planning right now. So in this example, that's personal to you, think about this situation and define the changes that you want to create. So obviously you don't have to turn in any homework here, but the more you can jot notes and think along, the more useful this session is likely to be for you. So first thing I want you to do is to think about the change that you want to create. What is it that you need to be different moving forward? Just state it. Next thing, estimate the resources that you're going to need to make this change successful. So for example, the expertise of members of your team, the capabilities. Are there specific people that you want on your team? What type of capital will you need? What type of funding or resources or space? And what is your timeline? We know that change is happening so rapidly now, but realistically, how much time do you have to ease this change into the organization, and how does that shape the message? So finally, state the benefits of your change. We want to stay focused on how your organization and your stakeholders benefit from the change. What does the organization gain? And what do the individuals within the organization gain? The more we can stay focused on the positive outcomes of this change, the easier it will be to keep people engaged and on board. So if going through these questions, you have anything that you'd like me to clarify, let me know. I'm looking at the Q&A now. Let me check out the chat real quick. Okay. Nothing yet, but please feel free to jump in. One of the things that the team and I talked about before we began is that I welcome your questions throughout. I'll be talking and managing the slides, but at this point, know that if you have any questions, put them in the chat and someone will let me know that they're there if I don't pick up on them immediately. Okay, so up next, your challenge now, once you, oops, sorry, a little technological issue there. You've listed your 3 big overall messages, and now your challenge is to identify the audience that will receive your message of change communication. Now, like the picture here, we don't want them to be just anonymous individuals, but add as much as you can to the detail of who these people are. List specific names so you can communicate to an individual. Identify their consistent concerns. What is it that you hear most consistently from your stakeholders? Is it quality of patient care? Is it concern about their job security? Is it focus on financial outcomes? Be specific in listing their concerns, because the more we can address their concerns in that initial message, the more we can gain support from the very beginning. Also, estimate their reaction to your idea. How do you imagine or estimate that they will respond to your message? Are they ready for change? Or more likely, are they experiencing change fatigue right now? Go ahead, take a moment and jot down some specific things about the audience that will receive your change message. Okay, so things are changing, but it's also quite helpful to emphasize what will remain the same. There's a sense of comfort in that, and employees resist change because they value and identify with the organization. They identify with that who we are, who I am as part of this organization. So Succeed in your messaging by emphasizing what stays the same. And since you know your audience and you've analyzed them, weave into that what you know they want to stay the same. What are the things they're happy with and they want to see continue? Also, avoid comparing the change outcome to the current culture. In time, that comparison might become relevant, but in the very beginning, we want to be very mindful and cautious about how we paint that picture of it being different. Now, if you've done a lot of research around your audience and you're responding to their requests, you may want to mention some of the potential change. But again, we want to avoid that compare contrast in the very beginning. Oh, and I wanted to point out that on my slides, I have the articles listed below because these are great resources for you that you can bring back to your organization or use to guide you through your change. So in a simple equation, the thing that we want to think about is that we want to create this appealing vision of change, partner that with that vision of continuity, and then the outcome will be support for that change. Appealing vision of change plus vision of continuity equals support for your change. So once you get that down, think about the most effective way to articulate your message of change. As you craft it, use plain language that avoids jargon. You choose descriptive language that is meaningful and paints a clear picture of what this outcome looks like. And make sure that your message is concise. We want it to be something that becomes very well known and articulated throughout the entire organization. So as you craft that first message, you have the opportunity to determine the language and the way that your employees talk about this change. So if you are doing your personal case study along with me here, feel free to go ahead and put it in the chat, put that message in the chat, and I'll be happy to give you some feedback on the message that you're creating. Okay, so now that we have the statement clearly established of what you're communicating, now we want to think about how we'll create that strategy for change. And we're going to go through each one of these steps. Telling your organization what you want, you as the leader living the change that you initiated, and then finally, how are you going to resource and measure the change? Let's dive into the first one. So we want to be real clear about the questions that we are responding to. And the first question is usually what? Tell the organization what you want. Engage them in your strategic vision by asking for outcomes rather than tasks. So rather than saying, here's what I need you to do today, paint a clear picture of what that outcome looks like, but don't dictate the route that your stakeholders will take to get there. We don't know all their jobs. We don't have the experience that they have. And the more we allow our stakeholders to come up with creative solutions, the more likely it is that we'll have that rich, robust outcome. We also want to make clear the full extent of the change. Rather than break up tiny bits and give it to them only in pieces, we've crafted this change vision that focuses on where we're headed, not just for the next 24 hours, but until that change is completed. So clarify the full extent of change. An example might be that our organization is doubling its size since we have acquired one of our competitors. So in 6 months, when the merger is completed, we will have 8,000 professional employees rather than 3,000. We will also have one consistent corporate culture that goes back to our mission and vision. So share that big picture vision, but allow your stakeholders the freedom to determine the best path to get there.
Hey, Molly, we have a question that came in.
Oh, good. I love a question. Let's hear it.
All right. So we have, when an organization undergoes regime change that abnegates the cultural focus of the past century and a half, how can a change manager sell what only the new regime believes?
Ooh, that's a really big, tough question. Thank you for asking that. So the part that is the most tricky here is that leaving behind the century and a half of tradition, because chances are you have folks on board who embraced that old vision. So your challenge here is going to be, let me go back in the slides, will be to create that sense of the appealing vision of change. Now, in order to know what your stakeholders want to change, it would be helpful to do some type of survey or focus groups or even one-on-one interviews. So we want to hear what change they would like to see so that you can incorporate their desire into your vision. Now, your vision is of continuity. So we've got 160 years of experience in our industry. We've been the industry leader, and now we have an opportunity to do it differently and better. So going back to emphasizing what will stay the same will help bring along the people who were with the old regime, and then ideally give them enough information to engage with the new vision.
Thank you, Molly. Another question we have here is, what
Oh,
communication?
and now I can look at your questions. This is helpful. Okay.
Yep, you can see them here and the answered ones that
Thank
have
you.
been answered. So the other question we have is, what communication channels do you suggest to use for communicating change to a department?
That's a good question. What channels work best is individual to the organization and the culture within that organization. So what I recommend is focusing on the overall vision and getting it out in a way that is accessible to your stakeholders. So that might be that you have a weekly coffee chat with the CEO, or it might mean that you have weekly one-on-ones with each person in your department. So use the tools that have been effective so far with your audience to reach them and to get that message out to your managers. So the more we talk in a moment about how you'll cascade this information, the more it might be clear. But definitely think about what you have that's working now. Are your employees constantly on Slack and that's where you need to meet them? Or are these weekly coffee chats with the CEO where everybody comes for guidance? Okay, I hope that answer was helpful. If you need more, let me know. What if the old folks don't want to change? They know what works and what doesn't. Yeah. So that's where, and thank you, Hanyin, for that question. That's where this vision of continuity can be a really powerful message. Now, depending on the authority and the influence of the old timers, think about how you can engage them as ambassadors of change. How can you bring them onto your team to be allies who help you promote change rather than resist it by glorifying the good old days. But we see that a lot. Okay, are there any more questions? Okay, curious as to why we're choosing the what. Excellent. Okay, so Melinda, thank you for that question. Starting with the what helps you craft that message before you get to the why. All right, so now we'll go to the why, and that might be helpful. Okay, so here's where we were, which is the what, which is what you want. Next, figure out what your employees want to know. Again, I cannot underestimate the importance of really hearing and responding to what your employees have said in the past and what they can tell you now about their response to change. So figure out what they must know. How will this affect their jobs right away? What information do they need to do their jobs well today so that the change can become immediately implementable? And what should they know? What's the desirable information about the organization that your stakeholders and your employees need? And then we don't ever want to ignore what our employees could know. What gossip and misinformation might be out there that you'll want to address head on and to counter head on as well. All right, any questions coming up around this?
No, nothing. We're good, Molly. Thank you.
All right, so here's the why, right? The why. Clarify the benefit to your team, but the why will be more apparent to you as a leader once you have figured out what you want them to know, what you need them to know, and now you can craft that message. So why do we need change? How does this benefit the organization? If you have, for example, as came up in that question, if you have 150 years of success, why do we need to change? What's different now? How does this change make us better and stronger? How does it strengthen the organization? And how does it strengthen the culture? So the first one is why we need to change. And secondly, why now? What is different about the world, the market, the economy, the culture today than it was last time we checked in? And also, what's the full extent of the change that we need? Is it a massive sweeping change, or is it just something that's a little bit more of a course correction? And based on 1 and 2, the why, the need, and the timing, what should we improve as a result? Right? What will be different and better because of this? And how will we measure the improvement that we've been targeting? And also, how does this new strategy link to previous strategies? Really, we want to identify the whys and the benefit, and then create as many threads of connection as we can between the accepted way of doing things and the new way of doing things. I see we have a question. Let me check it out. I would be more interested in the how and when. Okay, good. Well, let's go to that then. Thank you. That was a beautiful transition. I appreciate it. Okay. All right, so the how. So you have your message crafted, you've got your resources secured, you've got your allies and your consistent messaging, but it's not just enough to communicate that change. It's your job as the leader to live that change that you initiated. And what that means is that you'll want to continue to make, whoops, sorry about that. You'll want to continue to make this change a priority. You'll devote your time and your resources to the change. Make sure that you have blocked off time on your schedule to manage the change and to answer questions about the change, not just for you as the person spearheading change, but also all of senior leadership. How do we make sure that our time and our attention continues to focus on the change so that it doesn't become just another good idea that somehow faded away? If I could see a show of hands at this point, which I can't, by the way, I would say, raise your hand if you've been excited about a change initiative that just fizzled out. And I'm sure we would see a lot of hands go up, because oftentimes we're better at initiating the change messaging than we are at actually moving it through the culture. So number one, the how is keeping that sense of time and priority so that you can actually bring this to life. The how, we're going to measure our change in the tiniest little 16ths of an inch or in 1% of improvement, because we want to be able to course correct as the change becomes rolled out. We want to resource it, and that means budget. It means the time that we've devoted. It means the expertise. And oftentimes it can mean training. So ensure that we've got the resources, and then we're measuring the success. We want to be adaptable so that if we do need to pour more money into one piece of it and less into another, then we can allocate our budget appropriately. But it's that sense of monitoring it and shepherding it through by providing resources and measuring the change. And then if you discover through the measurement that the change has stalled out or that enthusiasm is slipping, then we can go back and refocus. Okay, I see some questions. Let me jump in there. Oh, I love it. Hanyan, thank you for that great question, which was, am I suggesting doing a mind map? Yes, I would love that. That would be part of your audience analysis of your overall strategy creation. I like that idea very much. Next one. Are there many examples of bad? Oh, there are many examples of bad leadership. Yes, I've seen that. Can you give an example of good change management at a university? Yes. Well, let me wrap my brain around that, and I will come back with that in a moment. Next question, what problems often occur and how do we solve the problem? Next question, how do we combat change fatigue? Yes. Okay, so Scott's question about change fatigue. But yes, we have so many times when change begins and we get excited about it, and then the initiative fades away or dies before it comes to full purpose. So the way we do it is by that continual communication about continually putting the resources into the change and focusing ourselves on how we can make sure that that change doesn't die on the vine. And that means that we take it not just from we don't end at the messaging, we start at the messaging and we continue to monitor and promote it. So our communication becomes a real source of information gathering, and then we can become highly responsive. What problems can occur? How do we solve these problems? Yes, Harris, thank you for that question. Problems that occur are that we tend toward entropy, that while we are focused on change, that we often revert back to the most comfortable behavior because we're used to doing it, because it requires less energy. And so the focus for us here is to make sure that we're pushing forward and holding our stakeholders accountable for our new procedures or messaging or whatever that change has become. But we need to hold our stakeholders accountable and then reward them for using the new procedures, processes, whatever it is that we've changed. Okay, great. Okay, So let's see what's next. Oh, yes, I love this graph. So this is something that you probably don't need to do it now, but do think about of the key stakeholders that you have, the key leaders of the change initiative, perhaps the managers who bring that change into their departments on a daily or hourly basis. In addition to them, how do we need to message to our employees, to the ones who are living the change, especially our frontline employees who are connecting with customers or other employees, right? And we want to think about them in two different ways. Who do we need to include in the crafting of the messaging? Who do we need to include in the what, why, the how? Who helps shape this? And who do we need to inform about the change? Now, everybody needs to be informed, but the team that is helping you create and lead this initiative would be in your include file there. Okay, I see we have more questions. So let me check it out. What if the challenge is leadership itself not managing the change well? How does one manage up for change? That's a really great question. It's easy to announce change. It's easy-ish to message change. It's hard to bring it to life. And so that's a complicated question. And I will think about that and then get to it before the end. Managing up. We have some great executive ed offerings that deal specifically with how you message internally, how you manage up, how you manage the media. So that might be a good resource there. Okay, reorgs. Yep, they have visible consequences and staff reductions. Yeah, painful, right? Because it can destroy morale. What isn't so visible is that change management bonuses may have linkage to some of our colleagues being declared surplus. How can we address the anger and resentment that this engenders? Great question. I'm also going to make a note about that. Right, because anytime we have division, it can cause resentment among those who feel like they're taking the brunt of the change versus those who are benefiting from it. All right. Change and a SWOT analysis. Yeah, the SWOT analysis is a great way to start change. How do we communicate to the resistors that it's time to get out of Dodge? Oh, I'm going to recommend that you take the exec ed course on that, because that is a really complicated question. And we're bound to have some resistance. So make sure that when you resource back in the very beginning, when you look at the resources that you need for this change, make sure that human resources is a big piece of that, because human resources are the ones who can manage those who are resisting and might need to be moved to a different place if they're not willing to adopt the change, or they may just need some counseling to help them become on board. But this goes back to resourcing the change, and human resources will be a great place for that. How best to communicate with confidence. Okay, we're about to talk about that. So that's a beautiful segue. Thank you, Gary, for that. Okay, so we're about to move on to the second piece. We talked about crafting that message, but now let's talk about the communication itself, or how we put it out there. Are you ready for that? Okay. So we want to start with our internal messaging. The internal messaging is key. And let me move this box here. Yep. Make sure that your colleagues and employees are viewed as insiders, right? We want them to have the information first. We don't want them to read about it in the newspaper or a blog or hear it in gossip from colleagues. So we want to make sure that our insiders are our employees, that everybody gets this message first, and that we then respond to their concerns. We provide formats to listen to their concerns, and then we actually respond to them. Remember, in our audience analysis piece, we wrote down how we think they're likely to respond. So anticipate their reactions and have information ready that might help smooth the path for them, and also show that you've been considerate in crafting this message. So you can say, yes, we absolutely understand, and that's why we've set up this focus group that we'd love you to be part of. We know that this is a difficult change, and we're asking a lot of you. Frame your messages carefully. Remember that anytime we're asking folks to do something difficult, they'll be looking for subtle cues and messages that they don't really need to do it, or that they can do it in just the most minor way. So for you communicating this change, it's really important that you continually emphasize that this change is important, it's ongoing, and that we need everyone to be on board. So internal, everybody is an insider. So let's talk about the conversation around change. It happens in two main phases. The first is that we want to encourage listening, discussion, idea sharing, and innovation. Remember, I said that we're going to talk about outcomes rather than tactics. And that's where this innovation piece can be really interesting for us. Oh, I'm checking the time. I need to move on here, huh? So the innovation piece comes from your stakeholders. So we're going to begin with that listening and innovation piece. And then we're going to move on to natural closure. So our first three steps are intimacy, interactivity, and inclusion. That intimacy piece is about getting close, about being open to ideas, interacting where we listen, promote dialogue, and then inclusion where we open ourselves to their ideas and how we can use that to make our organization better. Staying focused the entire time on our sense of intentionality and moving forward with the change. So let's dig a little bit deeper here. And please note that I list this article here. It's also listed as one of the resources in the back. And it is something that will give you a lot more detail on this. This is my take on it, but I encourage you to get as much information as you can. So in terms of getting close, gain trust, create that sense of an open door culture that I'm willing to listen to you, that you're important to this initiative, and that you are an insider. Let everyone know, from your frontline employees contacting customers to the C-suite, that all of them have an important role in making this happen. Listen well, create avenues for those exchanges, anticipate conversations, and be willing to listen no matter what they have to say. And then really take that to heart. Create formats where folks can share not just with you, but with each other. And then appoint folks who can bring these important ideas to your attention. Get personal and vulnerable. Be authentic here. Share your stories and concerns. Ask for feedback on how you're doing, and then listen to it and respond. But that sense of intimacy creates credibility and authority and can promote that sense of buy-in, that we're all in this together. Make sure that you're talking with employees, not just to them or at them, but you are creating this two-way conversation where you respond directly. Consider how you'll cascade the information. Sometimes you'll need certain folks to know it before others. Maybe you want employees to hear this message from their managers first and then from you. What's the best sequencing of the information, and who's the best spokesperson for it? It might not be you in all cases, but you'll want to make sure that you have that ongoing conversation about it. Keep the information flowing. Know that in the absence of information, even updates where you say everything's going great, I point out A, B, and C as excellent examples of how this can succeed here. But if you don't send that information, folks will create their own version. In the absence of information, people come up with their own information. So remember that your ongoing messaging helps keep everything on point. Next comes inclusion. Create a way that you can expand employees' roles. Remember, if they're on the front lines, they're talking to customers, they're talking to vendors, they're talking to all the other stakeholders. They've got great knowledge of how your organization touches different lives. So encourage them to be brand ambassadors, thought leaders. How can they encourage employees to live your brand and to change? How can your thought leaders let organizations' creators know how to share and articulate the innovation? Encourage your stakeholders, your employees to be storytellers. Let everyone tell their stories. You gain their ideas. Let them know throughout that they're an important, a vital part of the change and its success. People love stories. Collect stories, feature those stories, and engage. Finally, communicating with intention enables you to pursue an agenda of change and bring closure so that you've communicated through the entire process of change. Let folks know that we are now officially, as an organization, although we've doubled in size, we're communicating with one voice. We're all embracing one mission and vision. And let me give you some examples, right? Highlight those success stories from your folks. Convey your strategic principles by explaining them through stories, through examples, and enable everyone to be conversant in the new strategy. Whether this means that we have talking points that we share, or we appoint folks who share their success stories and give examples of how they lived it. But the key is to let everybody know that we have gone from the initial change that we announced 12 months ago through the growing pains to now that complete transformation where we are now free to fly off as our fully metamorphosized selves and live this change. So the idea of the metamorphosis here is a really powerful one because it shows the change as well as the beauty of the outcome. And that requires, of course, that we manage and communicate thoroughly all along in every step. Okay, so I'm checking the time. I'm going to check some questions here and then close it out. Okay, so let me see what we have here. Oh, I got some questions about nervousness. Yes, that's a tough one. And remember that your confidence in the change is so important. So your practice and your faith in the change will be really important because your ability to convey this message with great confidence and endorsement can lead to its success. So I will pass on to the Business Over Breakfast folks some great resources I have about how you can control your nerves during important messages. I'm writing that down. I've got some great articles for you about that. The nice to have versus the necessary change. Yeah, that's a great question. The change that makes it to an organizational level usually is the need to have, the necessary change, especially when we're looking at a systematic communication. We want to make sure that we're looking at that need to have first and then the nice to have after. Let's see, how do I keep my own internal communications focused and not get sidetracked? Oh, great question, Gary. Having that focus and making sure that we're always on point, sending that consistent message is key. So again, these articles that I suggested will provide some suggestions for that. But again, for you, it's going to be about that intentionality, about crafting your strategy before you begin the messaging, and then continually looping back to it. Even if you have crafted some ways that it's different now because you've responded to your employees' input in the Q&A, make sure that we're always going back to that main message and supporting it in all of our suggestions. Okay, so then not getting sidetracked. Again, we have some great exec ed classes on internal communication, and they'll take a much deeper dive into this. One hopes the stories are positive, and we should provide a platform for those. Should you provide a platform? Yes. Provide a platform devoted to troubleshooting, because your bad news stories or your stories of failure can become wonderful tools to talk about better strategies to have successful change. So we don't want to hide the challenges or the failure, because chances are multiple folks and multiple levels are experiencing it. So turn those around into stories of how to succeed in new and creative ways. The more we can get that feedback, which is a gift, so thank you for that open question, the more we can get to that feedback and response, the more likely we'll be to be able to take those stories and turn them into tools that the stakeholders can use to overcome challenge when they experience it. Because you will stumble, and you can be there to pick yourselves up and get the new messaging going. Okay, being respectful of time here, I want to move on to our next steps, and we'll come back to any Q&A. So your next steps are to, first of all, create your vision. Imagine that your communication is so successful that the change succeeds. So now, what does that look like? What does the outcome look like for everyone, for individual stakeholders? How are their experiences better? How is the organization stronger? And for you, how has this change the way that you personally can contribute to the organization and the way that you can structure your time, your messaging, your contributions? So your action steps here involve creating that vision that you can always return to in moments of frustration, and it can become a litmus test where you decide what you're going to share or what you're not. Does this help us get further toward our goal? And the more we have that beautiful vision that we stay focused on, the more we're able to get there. So I have at the end a list of resources, and I also have something that you may find quite helpful, which is the 4 phases of a persuasion campaign. And I have here a description of it. And then the last one is an empty slide so that you can use this as a worksheet to craft your own communication. And so what we have here is, notice that 50% of our work is going to take place before we even communicate our plan, before we announce the plan, that red dotted line there. That we want to make sure that we have clearly established the need for change, that we have formulated the change messaging before we announce it, that we have planned, we've been responsive to what we've heard in our focus groups, our one-on-ones, our interviews, whatever it might be, that we craft it and then we communicate it. So here's your blank template, knowing that you will fill this in, whatever your need for change is. What is the way that you formulate your messaging, etc. And also put in here who's responsible at which pieces, which parts of the organization, who does what and when. Okay, so that being said, we'll go back to the questions that you have. I see we have a few minutes left. And I want you to stay focused on that vision. And let's see what the questions are. How do you communicate if you need to pivot along the way and alter but not abandon the new direction? Great question. How do we measure success in change? How do you measure success in change that doesn't shortchange your longer term vision? Good question. How should you continue to refine messages as you receive feedback from managers and employees? All really good questions. Okay. So the pivoting is a natural part of excellent change communication, that our pivots should be identified as ways that you're responding to employee needs and experiences. And you can say, we're still working toward the same vision here. However, I've learned from you that this is an effective way to do it. So we adopt it as a way to make our strategy stronger and publicize that it is in response to what we've learned from our stakeholders. And how do we measure success and not change our how do we look at each step while staying focused on the long-term vision? And the answer to that is to have that ongoing communication where we announce how well we're doing, we communicate how well we're doing, we let our stakeholders know that we're actively responding to their concerns, and we continue to focus all of those changes toward the long-term vision. Did I answer those questions? In my mind, I did, but it's all clear up here. Was it clear to you? That's the important question.
Molly, one final question we'd like to just ask as we close out. The items that you discussed, communicating intentionally and such, how can you speak a bit about how we can do that kind of communication when working remotely?
Oh, great question. Yes. So, oh boy, remote is the way of life these days for many of us. And in many ways, we're likely to get better feedback in a remote situation because folks are more willing to put things into surveys or online tools, or even to speak them in meetings with their cameras off than they would be if we were face to face. So in the online environment, we can gather information in ways that we previously weren't. But now we've awakened folks to the ways that we can communicate and be heard in these online formats. So even having Zoom office hours where folks can come in, they don't have to turn on their cameras, they can even be anonymous and ask questions and hear your thoughts. I've found that to be really helpful. I feel like I've only answered part of the question, Lauren. What was the other part?
No, I think you answered it perfectly. Thank you so much. And we are at time,
Okay.
Molly. So
Okay, well, thank you, everyone. I so appreciate your questions. Lauren, you'll make this slide deck available to them, correct?
absolutely. So we will include the slide deck in addition to the recording on our LinkedIn site as we do after each webinar.
Great.
Molly, thank you so much. It has just been such a pleasure this morning listening to your insights, and
Thank you.
thank you everyone for the thoughtful questions. I do just want to share a couple of things. So the winner of the 4-part Jamie Turner webinar series is Beth Hinton. Beth, we will be in touch with you in the coming days regarding all of the pertinent logistics. So we ask that you would please join us on April 1st for our next webinar, Digital Currency's Role in Innovation, Commerce, and Society, from IoT to NFTs, with Ben Konzinski. So again, we are pivoting now to this every other Thursday model, which is we've done throughout March. And so just a reminder that our next webinar will be on the 1st. We have some exciting programs coming up, a couple of which Molly will be teaching in, including executive communication and leadership presence, and leading and inspiring change. So lots of good stuff coming on the horizon. We thank you so much for a wonderful morning, and we wish you a pleasant remainder of the week and weekend.